What is going on, everybody? This is Kyle, aka AlienTude, and today I'm going to be reviewing a sword made by none other than Angus Trim. If you're not familiar with that name, Angus Trim is a pioneer in the modern sword reproduction market, especially in regards to sword harmonics and handling. His swords are widely known as some of the best handling blades on the market. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're not familiar with my reviews, you should know my qualifications. In short, I have none. I'm a geek who likes to collect swords, but I have no training in martial arts, blacksmithing, or history. I've only been actively using swords for less than a year, so I'm still very much a beginner at it. Keep that in mind during this review. These are the opinions of an amateur. Said opinions will be about this specific sword. I don't know exactly how representative this sword is of Angus Trim's work, because I've only handled it and one other sword made by him. I can talk about his reputation and extrapolate that to this sword, but that's pretty much just speculation. One last disclaimer before getting started. I've currently made this sword available for sale. I'm looking to recover some costs after recently paying for a dream sword. I don't think this will bias me in this review, but if you think it will, at least you know ahead of time. If you are interested in buying this ATrim, I'll have more information in the description. Okay, enough disclaimers. Let's talk ATrim and swords. I bought this for just under $1,100 US in late 2020 when it popped up available on Cult of Athena, and had it shipped directly to Valiant Armory to have a scabbard made for it. Valiant Armory charged me $450 US for the scabbard and had it completed in about 2 weeks. This sword is representative of an Oakeshott Type 12, a single-hand, cut-focus sword that has an acute enough point that it can still thrust decently. The fuller usually runs about 2/3 of the way up the blade, and it was most commonly in use during the 13th and 14th century. I think Type 12s are what most people think of when they picture a typical knight sword. Angus Trim makes swords based off historical finds. I don't believe he focuses on reproductions, but rather his take on the overall style. As I understand it, he doesn't like to make swords unless there is a historical basis to the design. This specific example is designated as a 12.9. I believe the .9 is indicative of the number of revisions he's done to the design of the blade style, and that implies he's refined it quite a few times. So let's take a look at the sword, starting with the pommel. It's representative of an Oakeshott Type I pommel, with a raised center boss that slopes out. This one, like most of the ATrims I see these days, has a blackened finish that I quite enjoy. I believe the blackening process helps protect from rust, although I still keep the parts oiled, just in case. The edges of the pommel are not sharp, although I do sometimes experience a touch of discomfort when in use, where the pommel will dig into the hand just a bit. This would be completely mitigated by wearing gloves, or probably just better technique on my part. In any case, I didn't find it impacting my use. Aside from handling, one of the other areas that Angus Trim is a pioneer in is in the connection of the pommel to the tang. He's developed a very well-regarded nut system that is at least as strong as peening, and more precise as well. Fairly recently, he has further refined this into a permanent nut system. I don't know exactly how it works, but it ends up looking great, like a peen block with an incredibly clean peen. The grip is wood core, bound in cord, and wrapped in leather. The leather is then wrapped in cord again to imprint the texture before that cord is removed. There's also a few risers near the crossguard and pommel. Everything on the grip is very well done. The leather feels great, and the transitions to the pommel and crossguard are both comfortable and tight. The color is kind of a maroonish purple that's pretty unusual in my experience. It seems to be one of the standard colors used by ATrim, but I can't recall seeing it on swords by other makers. I like the color, and it definitely stands out. The crossguard is blackened like the pommel. It's not all that representative of any specific Oakeshott type guards. I'd say it's closest to a Type 6, although the tips of the quillions don't flare out as much. It's very well formed with attractive lines, some subtlety to the depth and shape, and absolutely no sharp edges. The fit of the blade to the crossguard is pretty much perfect. The only sword I have that might be tighter is one with a custom cast bronze crossguard. Frankly, it's astounding how well fit this is. Before diving into the blade, let's take a look at the Valiant Armory scabbard. This is a felt-lined scabbard that they made after I had Cult of Athena ship the sword directly to them. It's a pretty simple design with rain flaps, 2 straight risers down the center, and a relatively low-profile shape. There's a matching belt that is low-key as well, although I didn't take any pictures of it. If you'll permit me a small detour, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I like about this sword, and the scabbard plays a part. I feel like this sword has a history to it, a story. There's some imperfections in the blade, I'll get to that shortly, and in the scabbard. You can see there's a smudge of brown on the front near the rein flap, and the entire tan color looks more like a dirty yellow. Altogether, this paints a picture of the type of person this sword would have belonged to. A knight, yes, but probably not a particularly wealthy one. He has a good sword, but not a perfect one. The scabbard's been around the block and been in some battles. Everything is well made and very functional, but this knight just can't afford flash. Anyway, that's just my imagination running wild. Back to the facts. The scabbard fit to the blade is excellent. There's absolutely no rattle, and the exact amount of retention I like to see. Okay, let's move on to the business end, the blade. Here's the measurements I've taken of the sword. One of the defining characteristics of an Oakeshott Type 12 blade is the lenticular cross-section, which this blade replicates nicely. The distal taper, that is, the thickness of the blade as you go from the crossguard to the tip, is very well done, which is no surprise, since it's an important factor in how well a sword handles. The blade starts off with a well-formed fuller that travels just over 21 inches, terminating very cleanly. The lines are pretty much perfect, which makes sense because I believe they are formed by machine milling. There's a ricasso that is about 4 inches long. It starts out quite thick and tapers into the edge nicely. I personally like having ricassos on swords because it allows me to wrap my index finger around the crossguard, which gives more tip control and a different feel. The tip is pretty acute and it's obviously asymmetrical. This doesn't affect the performance at all, and I don't mind that it's imperfect. Historically, blades were often imperfect, so this again makes it feel like this sword could actually be period appropriate. The edge is created with a very noticeable and prominent secondary bevel. When done poorly, a secondary bevel can practically ruin a sword, requiring an immense amount of careful grinding by somebody who really knows what they're doing to fix it. However, when done correctly, there's virtually no difference between it and a sword with one continuous bevel. ATrims have a reputation of secondary bevels done correctly. I can say this one is very sharp, but it demands precision and correct technique to cut well. That brings me to cutting. Please keep in mind that I'm a novice at using swords. I have no training and I'm learning as I go. Failed cuts are more likely my fault than the blades. And there are a lot of failed cuts. This sword has challenged me to improve my technique. As I said, it's quite sharp. I can cut paper with it easily, but cutting pool noodles proved to be pretty difficult. If I didn't put enough oomph into the strikes, if my edge alignment was off even a little bit, or if I didn't put enough drawing motion into the cut, the sword mostly just slid off the pool noodle, or the pool noodle bent out of the way. With my poor technique, I've beat up several pool noodles with little to no cutting, and the cuts I did get usually ended up tearing more than anything else. It wasn't until I got my whole body into it, driving with my core, that I was able to cut consistently. When I did that, I was really happy to deliver several clean cuts in a row. Being honest, I was somewhat concerned about my repeated failure to cut well with this sword. I started questioning whether the edge was sharp enough, or if the blade geometry was good enough. Even though I fully acknowledge my cutting technique has a long way to go, that hadn't stopped me from getting good, clean cuts with other swords. It was after I delivered those clean cuts that I finally realized the fault was on me, and I just needed to improve my technique. This sword should actually help with that, since it requires me to use it properly. Moving on to handling. ATrims are known as some of the best handling swords in the business, and this one's no exception. The point of balance is about 5 inches from the crossguard, and it just feels right. The sword feels like an extension to my hand and arm. I'm able to grip it in a variety of ways, hammer, handshake, saber grip, and they all feel good. I did feel the pommel bite into my hand a little bit, but it was more just a bit of discomfort than any actual pain. Let's talk bottom line. Was this sword worth the price? Honestly, for a while I was thinking no, it wasn't. I was disappointed in its cutting performance, and I just felt let down. But once I got a bit more oomph into the strikes and used the sword successfully, I realized it wasn't the sword letting me down, but the other way around. I'm still unskilled enough that using this sword properly is a challenge for me, and with that realization, my disappointment faded and I started really appreciating the sword a whole lot more. So yes, I think this ATrim was worth the price, if for no other reason than to reinforce to me that technique is actually very important. However, if you're interested in a sword that will just work no matter what, there's plenty of other ones out there, and this one probably wouldn't be worth it to you. For instance, I can recommend the Balor Arms 15th century Italian longsword for that. That sword cuts everything I put in front of it with little to no effort and is amazingly fun to use. But I think demanding actual technique can be a good thing, so if you're looking to improve your skills, I think this sword is a great buy. I've mentioned it before, but I'll also take a moment to say that I believe Valiant Armory scabbards are absolutely worth their price. The turnaround is amazingly quick, they're a joy to deal with, and I think the scabbards they make are very good for the price range. Like I said, I am looking to sell this sword and scabbard, so if you're interested in purchasing it, check out the description below. I've been scouring the house for clutter I can sell on eBay to help make back the cost of my new dream sword though, so I can't guarantee this sword will stay available for long. I'd be happy to keep it. Alright, that's going to wrap up this review. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. Until next time, Alien Toot out.